Lucas Miles Show.
Welcome to the Lucas Miles Show. I'm your host, Lucas Miles. Hello and welcome to the Lucas Miles Show. I'm your host, Lucas Miles. I don't know about you, but I've got the Mr. Rogers theme song in my head. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood because my guests today are Micah Fitzerman-Blue and Noah Harpster, who are the co-writers and executive producers of the new film, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks. I had an opportunity to screen this movie early from Sony, and I'll tell you what, it is incredible. Instantly took me back to my childhood. If you're anywhere in kind of that maybe Xennial or late Gen X to maybe early millennial that you grew up watching Mr. Rogers like I did, you are absolutely going to love this film. And even if you didn't, I'll tell you what, this is just a beautiful story. The life of Fred Rogers is so, I think, important for just us as a nation today, as people. And Noah and Micah just did an incredible job bringing this to the screen. I know you're going to love this interview. Before we get to it, though, here's a word about our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Cove. Head over to covesmart.com to find out more. My house is protected by Cove, 5-star home security system without contracts or headaches. Head over there and you can check out their system, all the different products that they have from door sensors, window sensors, home cameras. You can tie it in with an app. I can pull up my house right now, flip through the cameras, see what my dog and cat are doing, make sure everybody's safe. I travel a lot. It's a really great thing for, our family. I think you're going to enjoy it as well. Head over to covesmart.com. I want to thank them for their sponsorship. And with that, here is the episode
with Noah and Micah. Welcome to Lucas Miles Show. This is Lucas Miles, and on today's episode, I have Micah Fitzerman-Blue and Noah Harpster from the new film, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks. Micah and Noah, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you very much.
All right, so you guys are both co-writers and executive producers on the show. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I had a chance to watch this actually last night, so it's fresh. I loved every second of it. But I want to hear a little bit about why Mr. Rogers and why now.
I think those are two different answers or two different questions. The first one, why Mr. Rogers, is because we're going almost 10 years ago. We started this project, and it started because I had a 2-year-old and a newborn, and was very much struggling to find a way to communicate with my kids, with a toddler. And if you're a parent, dealing with a toddler is no fun. And so sort of half because of that and half because Micah and I are always sort of looking for interesting people to write about, I put an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on the computer, and Fred started talking, and my daughter, the 2-year-old, sort of turned and listened to him in a way that she certainly had never listened to me. And so I called Micah and I said, we should check out this guy because what he's doing is really special, and he seems like he could be interesting to write about. And so from there we sort of took a deep dive and found pretty quickly that, Fred Rogers would not make a great subject for a traditional biopic. He doesn't have the sort of like narrative arc of big changes in his life that you need to build a movie around. And so we then read Tom Junod's article, Can You Say Hero, in Esquire, and thought that it would be a good way in to talk about someone who had their life changed by Mr. Rogers. And Tom Junod certainly fit that bill. And that led us to the Mr. Rogers estate, which has an archive of all the letters and all of the emails that Fred wrote. And it turns out he was doing this with many people, not just Tom Junod, but dozens, if maybe hundreds of people, sort of witnessing to them on a regular basis. And they have all of those emails and all of those letters. And so we started cracking those boxes open and reading and realizing that we were really onto something narratively, but we were also really onto to something special with Fred, something that like our world desperately needs. Times like today are bleak, and we've lost our heroes. We've lost people that we believe in. We have very few people to look up to. And here in these archives, Micah and I discovered that, that Fred was very much alive and very much still an important part of the world, and that we had an opportunity to share that with people. And so that's sort of the answer to why Mr. Rogers and why now.
I love it. Did you guys, and I don't know exactly your ages, but did you guys grow up watching the show?
Yeah, man, we both certainly knew the show and watched it when we were young, but we weren't we weren't fanatical about it, and we certainly weren't just waiting to get a chance to make a movie about Fred Rogers. It was something that we sort of stumbled upon and then, fell in love with as adults and as new parents. Like I said, we've been working on this for almost 10 years, and my toddler is now 12, and, Micah has a toddler of his own now. And so it's very much been a part of our adult life while also being part of our children's lives.
That's incredible. I was definitely a Mr. Rogers kid growing up, and, even just starting the film, the movie and the transitions, the music, all of these things just instantly brought back those childhood memories, but in a kind of what I would call an elevated way with now adult emotions, in watching this, seeing this from this other angle and this sort of behind the scenes lens, so to speak, of Fred's life. And it was really, it was therapeutic and, entertaining and engaging and insightful. My wife and I had some just great conversation afterwards. And so, kudos just on a really, really well done story. I think, what are you anticipating, or what have you heard already from people who have seen this? What sort of responses are you getting?
It's always so maddening when you put something out into the world. There's always a risk that everyone's going to hate it. And so the fact that people seem not to hate it feels pretty amazing to us. And some people even seem to like it, and that's very gratifying. We wanted to make a movie about kindness and empathy in a very cynical time, and there's a risk there because it's a cynical time, and
right.
It may fall on deaf ears, and we are optimistic that maybe this story can cut through.
Let's talk about Tom Hanks a little bit, because obviously as a filmmaker, and I've produced a couple projects myself, that's a huge win for any filmmaker to be able to bring on somebody like Tom into the project. What how was that? How did that fully come together? And what was it like kind of seeing him being able to transform into that role, which I think he does very well in this?
Yeah, Noah and I had always hoped that we could get our script into Tom Hanks's hands, and at the same time, being working screenwriters or struggling screenwriters, you set your expectations a little more down to earth. But when Marielle Heller came on, she asked us, who we wanted to play Fred, and we said, well, we've always wanted Tom Hanks, but we can talk about sort of the more realistic options. And she says, well, here, why don't I just call him and ask? And then we're like, yeah, right. And then she calls Tom Hanks and sends him the script, and then Tom Hanks says yes, and we lost our minds. We don't know quite.
That's like take your shirt off and run a victory lap around the house sort of day,
Yeah, and then Tom Hanks gets the set, and Tom Hanks does an audition, so you don't know quite what the performance is going to be. And, is it going to be wrong? Is it going to be, some sort of highly technical impersonation of Fred Rogers? And what we thought was so elevating and revelatory about his performance is that he's not trying to do the perfect Fred Rogers. He's trying to channel Fred, and sort of he captures Fred's energy and his essence in this way that doesn't feel 100% like a spot-on Fred Rogers, because he didn't want the audience to evaluate his performance based on that. Nor is it just Tom Hanks, wearing a cardigan. There's some melding that happens, and we were shocked right from the outset. We were like, oh my gosh, we're actually on set right now with Fred, and everyone felt it.
When I started the film, and obviously I have, I had this picture of Mr. Rogers in my head, and I'd seen the trailer and different things, which I was, very excited the first time I saw that. And as I start watching the film, I made a comment about halfway through, and I know, obviously in filming you don't start with a movie and film scene one and go through and film the last, scene. It's all out of order based upon the locations and everything else, typically. And so, but I felt like as I was watching this, that I was forgetting almost what the real Mr. Rogers looked like in my mind, and that slowly that picture of Tom Hanks was kind of replacing it and sort of becoming that new character in my head in terms of who I saw when I thought of him. And he just really seemed to, just become that character. But I think you described it so well. Not necessarily a technical way, but there was just an essence of him in that he brought to the screen. I thought it was just a fabulous performance, and I really suspect that you're going to get the audience responding well to that.
We hope so.
So you said this has been kind of 10 years in the making. How long was the actual production schedule? I'm sure a lot of that was writing and kind of getting it to production. When did you guys start filming, and how long did that process take?
Yeah, we started shooting about a little over a year ago, and it didn't take very long at all. I think we shot for a couple months, and that was it. We shot almost entirely in Pittsburgh. Actually on the WQED stages where Fred shot his show, and replicated the sets, and a lot of the same crew were around and sort of popping in and providing their insight. We tried to keep it as true to the show as possible.
Let's talk a little bit. Obviously, I don't want to give away too many spoilers here. I mean, I think people are familiar with kind of the overall story of Fred Rogers, but you did something I thought just super creative in the film on the transitions between scenes, where you sort of brought in that make-believe sort of look to that. How did that come about? And I'd never seen anything like that done before. So can you talk to that at all?
Yeah, we wanted our movie to feel like a very special episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. That's for grown-ups. That's about this journalist. And we wanted to give our audience the feeling of being kind of wrapped in that warm hug of his show. And we also wanted it to feel, special, like a movie, and to do what you can do with movies. And so all of that results in our creating this frame around the main storyline, which is this episode, where Mr. Rogers is telling us about our main character, what to expect, and then we go into these transitions, and they were, Noah described the production process. We shot for about 2 months in Pittsburgh, and then we also shot for a week only with miniatures. We expand the world of the miniatures that exist in the original television program into sort of this broader universe. So it's not just the little toy houses on Mr. Rogers' Street, but it's all of Pittsburgh, it's all of New York, and we just thought that was a way to tell this bigger story and to tell it for the big screen.
Obviously, one of the questions in the film is that really this journalist is asking is is Mr. Rogers, is Fred Rogers the real thing? Is this kindness real? Is this just a character? Is it an act? Is he really, this kind of thoughtful, caring person? And so he's on this journey to sort of discover this. For the two of you as, filmmakers, storytellers, and in some ways, biographers, what did you find? What sort of, maybe nuggets did you uncover here as you dove into his life, interacted with people like his wife, and in order to be able to see, really who was and is Fred Rogers?
Yeah, I think that everyone we met and everyone we spoke to, many of which were people who worked with him, for the entirety of the show, which was, 50 years, said that Fred was that person all day long, that he was truly authentic, and that he was, I think Hedda, who worked for him, called him an emotional archaeologist, and that he would ask you a question and he would wait until you gave him an answer.
A real answer.
Like a real answer. And I think that is how he sort of began his relationships with people, is by asking real questions and waiting for real answers. And all of a sudden you find yourself, disarmed from, the armor that you've learned to build up all of these years. This man, in a couple sentences, has removed that armor, and you're talking about, the very essence of yourself, or your biggest fears, or, your biggest shortcomings. He had a way of getting into you and your problem in a way that no one else really did. And everyone we met said that, like, whether they, had just met him or if they had worked with him for 50 years. It's like he demanded that of you. Like, he demanded that intimacy with you if he was speaking to you. And we tried to put that in the film and make that, a major part of his character. I think we also learned that he was like a very private man, that even though he demanded that sort of intimacy of other people, he also, had his own life and his own family and had his own struggles. And when people asked that of him, he often turned it around and asked another question of them, which was, I think, was a surprise to us. He always would answer a question with a question, famously. So I think those were the things that we learned about him.
Talk to me a little bit, we just have a couple minutes left here, but talk to me a little bit about his faith, and that comes through, to a degree in this film, but I think in a very approachable, relatable way. If you were to maybe answer, what's really, what is the faith of Fred Rogers? What does that look like, you think, in his life, and what's that message that you're trying to bring out through the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think, sort of real quickly you realize that Fred is a man of deep empathy and, kindness forward, and is an amazing listener. But, he also was a Presbyterian minister, and he never hid that. He never, hid that part of himself. But he also never proselytized. He never, he just witnessed. He just lived it in his life on a daily basis. And faith was very important to him. And I think that we tried to translate that to the movie, which is this is not something we want to hide. This is, but it's not something we want to preach either. We're not proselytizing. We're just saying this man has a deep faith, and it leads his life, and it's just part of who he is. And that's what we tried to put in the movie. And no one ever questioned that throughout the entire process. Everyone, I think, not only were they allowing it, I think they were glad that it was there.
That's an interesting answer and good to hear. So that's really exciting. And I just can't wait for our audience to be able to see this film. I know it's hitting theaters on November 22nd, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks, and that's in theaters everywhere. I have a feeling you're going to be hard-pressed to not find a screen that this is playing on. Is there a website where they can get some more info?
It's abeautifulday.com. It's just abeautifulday.com.
Perfect. All right, my guests today are Micah Fitzerman and Noah Harpster, co-writers and executive producers on the film A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood starring Tom Hanks. Definitely go check it out. November 22nd, theaters everywhere. Guys, thank you so much for being on the program, and best of luck with the project.
Thanks, Lucas. Thank you.